Hello there, welcome to the third lesson of the Python course for beginners. In this video, we will cover up the main data types in Python. Before that though, let us see how to solve yesterday's homework question. So we go to our desktop where we had saved the file. Now if I go to the Python file and normally open it by double left clicking, it opens the input and output window where I can type an input and I'll get an output, but it will last for a very short while. So I can right click this and then I will click on edit with IDLE to actually open the window where I can edit. Now let me just delete this old code. So let's start solving the question. Now the first thing we want to do is get input. So I'll first define a variable called C1. Now you can name the variable anything, but I'll call it C1 where C stands for color. Now I'll assign the input to this variable. So I'll put the input function and I'll type enter first color in quotation marks because this is the text I want to display so the user knows what to input. I'll do that same thing for the second variable C2. And now I want to print these things. So I'll print the statement as the question says. So first I'll use the print function. Now I'll put the first variable, comma, and now I want to print the text and. So I'll put that in quotation marks because we want it as it is. Now I'll put the second text, or actually variable called C2. And now I want the text R2 colors as it is, so put that in quotation marks again. And if I run this, I'll give the first color input as red, second color input as blue, and it should work properly. Now remember I said the comma sign is used instead of the plus sign usually. So if I replace the commas with the plus sign, let us see what actually happens. So I replace the commas with the plus sign, so it becomes C1 plus the text and plus C2 plus the text R2 colors. And now if I run this, I give the inputs, and as you can see, it just comes as one piece of text. There's no space here or even there. So this is actually called concatenation, but I want the spaces. So for that, I'll have to put spaces within the text in the quotation marks. So now if I run it after giving the spaces and I enter the inputs, it will work properly and give me the same output I got the first time. But putting spaces every time can get really annoying, so we'll just use commas. Now if I put this C2 in quotation marks, let us see what happens. If I run it and I again give the inputs, as you can see, C2 comes as a text. The value of C2 does not come, so we don't want these quotation marks. Now I'll just put this in a comment as we won't be requiring it. Now putting the hash symbol before every line so that it can become a single line comment can get really boring. So what I'll do is I'll just remove these, and I want to change all of this to a multi-line comment. For that I put 3 single quotes in the start and 3 single quotes in the end. I can even put 3 double quotes in the start and 3 double quotes in the end. But remember that the quotes you start with should be the type of quotes you end with, because if I start with 3 double quotes and I end with 3 single quotes, now whatever I type after that also becomes a comment. So if I start with 3 double quotes, I should end with 3 double quotes. Now as you can see, the print function comes normally. Now coming back to data types, we will discuss 4 of them in this lesson. Now in English we use nouns, adjectives, verbs, and so on to differentiate the types of words. Similarly, In Python, we use these data types to differentiate the type of data so that Python knows what it can do with it. Now, data can be anything, like a piece of text, maybe a number, or anything you want it to be. So, the main data types are as follows: integer, floats, string, and boolean. Let's discuss these separately. Integer are all the integer numbers and hence don't have any decimal point. Floats, on the other hand, are decimal numbers and hence have a decimal point. See these examples. Strings are any piece of text. These are put in single quotes or double quotes. In Python, it does not make a difference whether we put them in single quotes or double quotes. So it can be any usual text like hey or hello. It can also be numbers as long as I put them in quotation marks. But then you won't be able to do maths operations with these numbers. We will come to that later. Strings can also be any random symbols in quotes. Boolean values are used to store data like yes or no. So basically true or false. Note that in this, true starts with capital T and false starts with capital F. So these are some of the special keywords that start with capital letters. If I use true with a small t or false with a small f, it won't work and will act as a variable. Now let us check them out in Python. Now I could continue typing over here, but what I'll do is I'll just go to a new file. Now you can close the previous file if you want. So what I'll also do is I'll go to run, then click on Python shell. Now I'll get this interactive mode of Python. So I will just split screen it. Now when I type something over here, I can immediately see the output over this set. So I will discuss data types using this interactive mode of Python. Now if I create a variable called a, and in this I store the number 5, now I will use this function called type. So I'll also put parentheses because in a function we use parentheses. Now if I inside these parentheses I'll put a because I want to find the data type of a. So if I hit enter, it shows int. Int is the short form of integer. But now if I had changed this value of a to 5.0, and again if I see the data type of a, it shows float because now it becomes a decimal. So first it was an integer, but now it becomes a decimal. Now if I create another variable called b, and in this I store 1 divided by 2, then if I print b, now in interactive mode we don't need to use the print function to print something. We can just directly write the variable and hit enter and it prints the value. So as you can see, Python converts fraction into a decimal value. So if I type data type of b, it shows float. Now if I create a variable called c, and in that I store a string called hello. Now if I see the type of c, then it will show str, which is the short form for string. Now similarly I can also do it for another string. So in this let me type a number. So if I type, let's say 16, then if I see the data type of d, it will show string because this is in quotes, so it works as a string. Now if I normally put it, and again if I check, it will obviously be an int. Now let me see what happens if I do c plus d. So obviously there will be an error because you can't just add an integer value with a string value. And notice how it says concatenate. So when I use the plus symbol, it automatically assumes that it has to concatenate because here there's a string, whereas here there's an integer. But then if I change the value of d to the string value of 15, and then now I try, as you can see, it concatenated the things. So value of c was hello and value of d was 15, but then as a string. So what it does is it just puts the two strings together. so it becomes hello 15. Now let's see Boolean values. So if I create a variable called e, and in that I store true, as you can see, the color changes to orange, so it shows that it is a keyword. If I typed it with small letters, so it would show an error, but now if I type it as with capital T, then there's no error shown. So if I print, or actually let's see the data type of e, and as you can see it shows bool, which is a short form for boolean, and I can store the next one as false. If I see its data type, again it's boolean. So true and false are booleans. Now the reason why I was saying that a small letter can act as a variable is because if I do not capitalize this, and then I can store any value in it, let's say ABC as a string. So if I see the data type of this without the capital letter, remember, so now it's a string because the ABC stored in it. So this can act as a variable now. We should always remember to use capital letters for true and false. So now I'll close this shell window and let us write a program. Now I'll make a program where I input a number from the user and I add 5 to that number. So first we make a variable, let's call it n, or you can call it anything you want. Then I take an input from the user. Now either we can store n plus 5 as a variable, or I could just directly print n plus 5. Let me just directly print n plus 5. So if I run this, I enter a number 10, it shows me an error. So now let's see what this error is. So as it says in this file, which is this file, in line 3, so this is line 3, it shows it can only concatenate string, not integer to string. So let's see why that happens. Now if I see the type, if I also ask it to print the type of n, in the script mode we have to give the print function as well. So now if I run this, now as you can see 10 is stored as a string, so that is why it's not able to just add a string with a number 5. So for that we use data type conversion. So to avoid this error, what we have to do is convert this input to an integer, because right now it's in the form of a string. So for that we use a function called integer function. So if I put this whole thing in int, and remember to put parentheses at the end. So there are two parentheses at the end because this first one is the closing one of the start of input, and this ending one is for the integer thing. So now if I try to run this, I enter a number 10, it works because it becomes an integer and hence it gets added. So if you want to convert into a float, I can put float over here. I'll do the same thing, but now let's see what happens. So if I again type a number 10, it shows float and it shows 15.0, because what happened is first this got converted to 10.0. Like first this 10 was a string, then it became 10.0, then it added 5 to 10.0, so it became 15.0. Now if I want to convert this back to a string, so I'll make a change over here. I will again reassign the value of n to its string value. So we use str function, which as I told earlier is the short form of string. So n becomes the float of the number value which is entered, and then I convert that to a string again. So we cannot add, so let me just see what the type will be. If I run this, if I enter a number 10, so as you can see first it got converted into a float. Like when we are inputted it, it was originally a string, then it got converted into a float, and then it printed the type, so which was float. Then we converted it back into a string, and then it became a string. Now suppose I had entered a decimal value over here and then I want to convert it into an integer. So let us see what to do. So if I use the int function, so n is equal to int of n, then we first print its type just to keep on checking if you're doing it right, and also we'll print n. So I run it. Now let's say I enter 10.7. So first it's a float 10.7, then it gets converted to an integer. So the integer is the value of the float without all this decimal point part. So it does not round off, like it won't round it off to 11. It will just directly remove this whole decimal part. Now let's see some Boolean stuff. So first of all, let me just comment this out. Now if I create a variable b and I assign 5 greater than 7 to it, as you can see, this is neither a number nor a string. It's a relation, whether 5 is greater than 7. Also, we will learn more about these relational operators such as the greater sign in the further lessons. So if I print b, as you can see, false is printed because, well, we know that 5 is not greater than 7. Now if I change this to whether 9 is greater than 5, obviously it should print true. So first it was false because 5 is not greater than 7, but then it became true because 9 is greater than 5. Now I'll again put this whole thing in comments. So for that, what I'll do is remove the quotation marks from here and end it over here. Now the homework question for today is, you take an input from the user as that person's height in meters, and then the output should be that person's height in centimeter. So you're basically multiplying it by 100. That's the homework for today. Good luck and have a nice day.